Andrew, how's it
Mark,
going?
good. How are you?
Awesome. I'm pumped to have you back on the John Mini podcast. We're talking about IPM, Integrated Pest Management
That's
today.
right. Very
I
excited.
don't think we'll go too deep. We'll see. We'll let it take its course. But I think we're going to kind of just do some like introduction to it in general. And
Yes,
um, why don't we just start there? What is IPM?
sure. Well, it's integrated pest management. Let's start there. Okay. So I hear it used often, mistakenly used to mean just dealing with insects. I also hear it mistakenly used meaning like beneficial bugs. We use IPM inferring beneficial bugs. That's not necessarily the case. In fact, depending on what your program is, it could involve some pretty heavy synthetic pesticides. And I also just hear it being used, meaning like, we don't use pesticides, which, as I just said, it does not mean that. So let's pull it apart, right? So, what is a pest, first of all? So, this is actually kind of more of a legal term. And so, according to the Federal Insecticide, Fungicide, and Rodenticide Act, which is FIFA, if for those who have taken
What
the
is it?
test, it's called FIFA.
I was like FIFA,
FIFA,
like the World Cup FIFA.
yeah,
I
no,
was like, they gotta do a little brand change.
it's our, everything in the government is acronyms.
Yeah,
This is
yeah,
the EPA's like kind
FIFA.
of law, FIFA, yeah. So if you've taken your pesticide exams, you're probably familiar with it, but it defines a pest as any living thing that can be harmful to humans. This includes plants, animals, microorganisms. So for us in horticulture, it could mean like if you're dealing outside, it could mean like rats and stuff like that, or
Sure.
deer even. But for indoor and more outdoor, like on the horticulture level, it's like fungus, bacteria, so disease. Could be like, not the good nematodes, but the bad ones in the soil. And of course, it can mean insects. And
Sure.
I'm probably going to talk more about insects during this, but it's really important to make the point because a pesticide, as I just said, can be all those things. So a registered pesticide could be a fungicide, right? So you may need your pesticide applicator license to use a fungicide. So really anything that's registered there with the EPA as a pesticide, is a pesticide. Or depending on your state, anything that's used to kill a pest could legally be a pesticide. But um, so, okay, that's pest.
Sure.
So I'm going to go to management next. I know I'm skipping the integrated part, but management is basically in the concept of IPM. It is really managing. It's really like so. IPM uses a threshold system to make decisions of when certain action should be taken. So in agriculture, for which it was developed, I believe, it's really like how many insects is tolerable for you before you need to take action. In other words, when does the benefit of using some sort of pesticide control or increasing your intervention or toxicity equal the risk or the economic protection. So depending on the type of insect, and we're going to talk about monitoring too, because monitoring is key to this. Depending on the type of insect for us, in indoors at least, like one fungus gnat might be too many. So that reaches our threshold. So that means action should be taken. But really, I think that the most important point here is management means like what's your tolerable level. So it doesn't necessarily mean total destruction of an insect.
Sure.
It's what you can manage, and that's an important point of pest management because to a certain extent, it should be viewed as sort of like an ecosystem management. That's kind of where the approach is today.
Yeah.
And then integrated. So what do we mean by that? It's an integrated approach because it integrates several pest control tactics into one single cohesive approach. So I'm going to get into that because that's really the framework whereby IPM exists. But before I do, I just want to talk a little bit about scouting and monitoring. We just kind of discussed that it's about management and what's your tolerable levels. So a typical program definitely relies on, monitoring
A
and
typical
IPM
IPM
program,
program.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, scouting and monitoring is really an important part of horticulture,
Yeah.
but kind of knowing when you need to take certain steps is what's and when you need to escalate your intervention is really key. But also timing is really important. This may be more so outdoors where we have an understanding of the insect cycles, their life cycles, but it's also the case inside. So, for instance, when we have some major scale issues on trees, armored scale, same with outdoors. We just kind of know outdoors that in the spring is probably the best time to treat because we might have the crawler insects. This armored scale is very hard to treat with almost everything because it has that armored shell. But when they are in the juvenile stage, their crawler phase, they call it, they're very, very vulnerable to anything. So you can intervene at that stage with, like a dormant oil, horticultural soap, even just spraying them off, and it will be a much more effective approach. So indoors, it sort of follows the same routine, but having double-sided sticky tape is one of our monitoring techniques indoors. And so scale crawlers are their active stage too. They're juvenile, but they also are very highly mobile. So by kind of reviewing the double-sided sticky tape and looking at it closely, we can actually see when the crawlers are hatching and know that that's probably the best time to treat. So we kind of jump at it and then do multiple treatments. So um,
Just to jump in there, so
yes,
just very clearly, like scouting and monitoring tactics and strategy is part of an effective IPM program,
100%.
right? No, and I want to interject there because I think there's going to be other points probably where like
Yes.
this thing I'm talking about or this tactic I'm talking about in horticulture or it could be agriculture, right, is part of IPM. And I think that gets back to like where you started, where like, we do IPM is just
Right.
like thrown out there, and like, what does that mean? Are you referring specifically to something specific that it's not something specific, it's broader. So I just want to say, like, when you're talking about, hey, let's start with monitoring and scouting, that is a part of our IPM program.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
I mean, you could just mean like the control portion of it and not the monitoring part. But monitoring it is
Which
like,
control is probably what people like. I'm just talking from intuition. Like when I hear people throw out IPM, they're probably just like, "Oh, we do IPM," like, and they're saying like, we do control.
Yeah,
and here's what we do.
Yeah.
Sometimes they throw it out like in a very specific control too, right?
Exactly.
But I think I'm jumping ahead.
Yeah. But so one of the things that we've played around with is, I mean, we have like a holding area for plants that come in, and it's a little tricky there to do scouting, for certain insects because they might come in from Florida and they might be like just kind of hiding there, not like nobody's going to send you a plant that's infested, hopefully. But there's certain tactics they use in greenhouses. They put out sticky traps. I'm sure that anybody from the indoor world would be aware of the yellow sticky traps that are good to monitor fungus gnats. Mm-hmm. But there's also blue sticky traps, like a light blue, that are great for thrips.
Cool.
And if I had my way, I would have these sticky traps in every plant, but obviously, aesthetics and clients wouldn't want that. But at the holding stage, you could actually hang these maybe every 10 square feet or so, and then check them daily. And then, say, if I see 3 fungus gnats in area 1, okay, let me isolate, or let me, do something preventative there, or a treatment in that area, because, you have something. Mm-hmm. So these are, there are pretty great examples out there of pest scouting programs done in, professional agriculture or, in the growing world. But some of your basic tools for scouting for bugs in this, a hand lens. So all of our horticulturists for indoor and I think it'll probably be outdoor soon are going to have a hand lens with their a magnifying lens, awesome. Like a 10 to 30x magnifying lens. They call this like a beading tray, but
it's awesome. It's like where you start to equip horticulturists not just with
to do their job
tools, to like the scientific tools to do or the tools to do the scientific parts of horticulture
100%.
versus just the tools to do the aesthetic and like shaping and
Right.
stuff like that. I
Yeah.
mean, there's all buckets of tools,
And that
but I
could-
just like that goal.
I mean,
Yeah.
it's got to be. I mean, you can define landscaping however you want. It
Sure,
could be
yeah.
just like scaping the land or whatever.
Horticulture is
but,
a blend of
but
like practice
horticulture-
and science.
exactly. And horticulture is like critical to what we do. But the other thing is when you're actually looking at bugs through the hand lens or a microscope, it totally changes your perspective and opens up a whole new world because you're actually seeing it. It's like thinking about conceptually chemistry I've never really liked, but like if I could see everything as I'm talking about it in like a cellular level, I think it just like makes more sense, especially to horticulturists that like to experiment and work with their hands and see stuff.
Yeah, it's cool.
So there's a beading tray, but we just sort of, I don't necessarily call it that, but they actually use a metal tray sometimes, but white paper is what we generally use. I've seen the suggestion for black paper, which actually does work too. But if you take a piece of white paper and you sort of fold it a little and hold it under a plant and you sort of whack the plant or shake it a little bit, what falls on that paper will be, could be mites, could be spider mites, could be something, but it's a really great way to see what's going on, what you knock off, and it's a great way to isolate it. Of course, sticky traps, we talked about, notebooks. In some instances, you want to have something to collect. Notebooks, just
for documenting.
Yeah, documenting.
Yeah. That's important.
I mean, it is, and I don't know how extensive a program. I mean, I think it really depends on the situation. If you're doing some real intense, like atrium-based
like
work,
the landscape,
if
it's like maybe you're not documenting the activity every visit on a plant and container, like a smaller plant in a container. But if it's a larger landscape, you might do a little bit more documentation.
And if you're doing preventative stuff, if you're using certain products you've never used, you really will want to monitor what you're seeing, and you're going to want parameters in order to monitor. So one way that you could monitor would be with this piece of white paper or beading tray. What do you shake it 10 times, what do you see, and then take an average of what's coming off those plants. Or you're refreshing sticky traps and saying, what am I seeing on these? So understanding how to scout is pretty important. So also things to collect, maybe if for instance, scale is very, very difficult to identify what type it may be. And we're not going to go too deep into this, but there are certain beneficial insects that you can apply that are very specific to the type of bug that they're going to eat. So it's like, red California scale, nothing else, but just that. So being able to identify the insect that you have is pretty important in some scenarios, especially if you're trying to use low intervention methods. So you're not, what I mean by that is you're not just like spraying like a kill-all spray. You're actually just trying to, be really particular with what you're doing. So there are places you can send, University of Florida, Cornell, they all have entomology departments where you can send the actual bugs. They tell you how to package them, and they will precisely identify them for you, which is pretty cool. So really the most, if you Google IPM or if you kind of look it up anywhere, it's probably going to be represented in the shape of a pyramid. And the pyramid is the decision-making tool. And the reason it's a pyramid is because it sort of represents, IPM is sort of a hierarchical way of, and the pyramid is the visualization of that, of the different preventative and control methods. So the base of the pyramid that's the biggest would be the one that you should use the most of.
Got it.
It's used the most extensively and where you start. So the higher you go up on the pyramid, so it may start as like cultural, or it may start as like a physical control, meaning literally take that plant and throw it away, isolate it. And then at the very top, it might be, a synthetic pesticide, like a towel star that's used for pretty much every bug and is just sort of toxic in general. Mm-hmm. So the higher you go, the more toxicity, the more risk to the environment, the more risk to you. So it increases in risk, higher you go. It's also
So
more
going up the pyramid
right.
is greater in general risk. I don't like. I think that usually we probably be talking in every specific situation, right? But it's a higher risk in human and environmental safety generally.
Generally, yes, and it has to be generalities here.
I know because like also I think we're economics come into play
They do.
in part of the conversation as well.
They do.
Maybe some with us as a horticultural or landscaper, right? But also in agriculture, I would imagine that's big.
It's big, and I think it was really thought of more as like an environmentally conscious like holistic approach. But I think for us in an urban environment, it's very particular, like to evaluate and rank like the risk to us as
People.
applicators, but the
Agreed.
risk to the people as bystanders around.
Yep.
Not to say that that's not important. Of course, it's important in all case scenarios. But if you're working
Urban horticulture,
yeah,
intersection of
people and plants, yeah,
I know you've said it a lot. That's why
I know I do.
Set you up.
I know.
I love it.
Well, yeah.
No, it's a really good point.
You're working on a farm, you may have the proper equipment. There's also another set of laws that applies to you, workers' protection standards, and you may not be around many people, so you may, be able to do a little bit more, potentially do more safely. But we're going to go actually over some of those risks and why this can be a very a more complex process if you really want to do it correctly. But in general, it's thought to be presented in a way that's sort of common sense. Start with what's simple, but continue to evaluate, and then understand your thresholds, and then increase and be increase your risk and toxicity, and also your intervention, like the more insects there are, but so like it's also meant to be like there's like a proactive approach, which would be at the very bottom of the period, versus a reactive and curative approach, which would be at the very top.
Mm-hmm.
So let's kind of talk about them, and it's very and it might be helpful if whoever listens to like Google this pyramid, just so they can kind of see. I know it helps me to see it visually. So on the very bottom of a pyramid, or actually I'll just give you 4 general layers of a pyramid. So at the very bottom, it may be cultural, and then up from there, it's mechanical and physical. Up from there, it's biological, and then up from there, it's pesticides. So let's talk about what each of those layers may mean. And these pyramids vary. This is one that we have. This is how it looks for our interior IPM program. We have a fully flushed out program with specific products and specific issues and instances that people can refer to. I think it's worth doing. I don't know of any other completely flushed out indoor program. There's certainly frameworks to discuss how it should be used, but I haven't actually come across one that gets really specific. But anyway, so on the very base at cultural practices, so these are generally practices that change the environment to make it less suitable or attractive for pests. These are also actions that can be considered as part of like our cares. So I kind of look at it like this. I think it's like if everybody's doing their part culturally to solve the problem, then we're less likely to have an issue. So from purchasing, buying from reputable sources, visiting your greenhouses or your vendors, seeing which ones are clean, what their practices are, buying plants that are appropriately acclimated, stress and let me keep going. So when you get them to your HQ, or if you're handling them before they go to a site, making sure that there's a quality control standard there, keeping your plants spaced out, keeping them clean. On a sales level, when you're selling new plants to people, selecting potentially pest or disease resistant cultivars, or selecting plants, the right plant for the right place. So referring back to the indoor world, if you've ever used like a croton, you may have had some spider mite issues, or maybe like a Neanthobell palm. And we know from our entomology that spider mites breed much heavier in hot and dry environments. So if you put a croton or a neanthobell palm on a hot windowsill, you're more likely to have a spider mite issue. So selling maybe something different there would be a course of action culturally. And then from a service level, horticultural level, taking steps to reduce plant stress in terms of light, water, humidity, growing medium, nutrition, keeping our plants clean. This is a little controversial, not really, but it falls more into like an integrated plant health program. So keeping your plants healthy will keep them less stressed, will keep them less insects, but I'm throwing it into our integrated pest management program. Um, the next level would be mechanical and physical controls. These are a little bit more obvious on the like in an agriculture world or outdoors. Like it could be setting up a trap for a like a rodent or something that might come and eat your plants, or it could even be putting up a fence, for instance. For us, it could be pruning heavily infested parts of a plant off,
Sure. Yep.
And then getting it to that manageable, tolerable level. It could be pruning or pruning, but it could also be like post spraying down a plant, washing plants, setting traps. I said the sticky traps they can be a trap, but they're more useful for monitoring. And it could be isolating a plant or removing a plant in general from a site. So in an interior scape, if you have a green wall and one section starts to have mealybug or one plant has mealybug, you want to get rid of it right away. And that would be a mechanical control. And that's also where you start to get into your like economics too. It's like, do you want to send someone there every week to spray this plant and try to keep up with it? Or are you just going to remove it and replace it with maybe a plant that's less prone to mealy? So that's your mechanical. And then escalating further is your biologicals, so this could be predators, parasitoids. It could be microorganisms. Some microorganisms are registered as pesticides. So this is a little murky here, but in the interior scape, there are particular predators that we use. Sometimes we use them in the preventative capacity because, for instance, with fungus gnats, we pre-treat with nematodes and some other insects. What is it? Stratiosquamatus mites. So those are, because our threshold is one is too many, but there are preventative things that you can do here in terms of using insects, and they're more helpful, at least in the indoor world, as a preventative. There's special cases like with spider mites. You could probably treat a pretty massive infestation by using a combination of different mites. And like I was just watching a cool video where they use drones to drop persimmilus mites onto strawberry fields, and they just prevent they're so aggressive, they prevent any spider mite populations from kind of growing. They're awesome. And if you actually like Google some of the videos on YouTube, you can see like them walking around. They're like these blind mites that just can like feel the vibrations of the spider mites and like track them down and do whatever. But so then there's like parasitoids. There's the very like parasitic wasps, and it sounds scary. I released like hundreds in my house once. I freaked everybody out, but nobody actually ever saw them because they're tiny. So they're not like these giant wasps, but things like aphids, certain types of scale, not really so much anymore. But so parasitoids, they actually like lay eggs into an insect and then use it as a host. And there's microorganisms. These can be considered like nematodes, your beneficial ones. Could be fungal, bacteria, viruses. We use a lot of microbials, bacteria and fungal products for pathogen control or pathogen prevention. And there are some really cool products out there that we're testing. There's one from Copert. There's another one, like I forget the name of the bacteria. Its product name is Botanigard. But they're basically these diseases like that. You spray this fungal spores onto the plant, and when an insect goes across them, and they're particular about which insects too, so it's not necessarily all insects. it goes into them, and like the hyphae goes into their body, and then it sporulates in them and like
Crazy.
eats them from the inside out, and then creates more. It's like the zombie mushroom people, the cordyceps, whatever. Um, but we're testing those because one of our preventative programs could, at some point in time, be actually spraying some spores on a plant before they go out into the field as a preventative technique. But I don't want to get too caught up in this. It's the most fun section for me because it's cool, but it's also where people mistake the word, as I said before, IPM4.
Yep.
So I'll move on from it.
Meaning, people just throw out the word IPM, assuming like, oh, IPM means we use beneficial predatory insects,
or exclusively that, or
for managing. Like that. Exactly. Like that's it. Like that's what IPM is.
That's what.
But it's like a very specific piece of IPM.
Exactly. I think even yesterday I was on a call. Somebody said we use IPM. We don't use pesticides, and like. Also, could we use horticulture oil because that's not a pesticide? So all of those statements are incorrect. But I can understand why those mistakes happen. But that's what we're here to talk about. So the very top of the pyramid is just generally called pesticides. I know all of these things can be considered pesticides, but here we mean products that are used as a spray. Or as a drench, as a pesticide product. So these can be.
What do you mean by drench? Just for people who don't understand what a drench is.
Right. So
I think people conception, if you're not familiar with this terminology, you can envision spray.
Right.
Like spraying something with pesticides.
So this is funny because this is actually where we are, at least indoor IPM program is novel in the sense because I've never ever seen a program that differentiates a drench versus a spray. So what a drench is you're actually pouring it into the soil, a product. And that, if you're not treating for something like a root mealybug or whatever, it goes systemically through a plant. So the poison enters the plant. There's actually fungi that can do this too. But anyway, the poison enters the plant, and then like you're sort of like sucking insects that like suck out of the leaves or out of the stem. Like here's something like a scale will take in that poison and it will eliminate them essentially. So why I differentiate those two in an indoor environment is because it's safer for bystanders and the people involved in most cases to do a drench as opposed to doing a spray, because when you're spraying, you're aerosolizing it. So you could think of a synthetic pesticide that could be safer to use for the people by drenching it than maybe like a safer soap or a horticultural oil that you're spraying, because the warning on that spray could actually be like, it's very dangerous if it gets in your eye. So I think it's really how safely you can apply it is definitely one standard here. But then there's also like basil tree spray, drench, which is when you're drenching like the kind of like where the trunk of the tree goes into the soil, that area where, and then there's things like injecting into the tree.
I was just saying injections, like where does injection, is that, I guess it's separate, right? But we generally talking about sprays and drenches.
Yeah, I guess I mean like, when you're aerosolizing something or something's in the air for me, or it's a dust or something like that, I think it's easier to control or prevent like a bystander. You can take all that.
User and bystander.
I mean,
not purely, but like generally.
Right. Exactly. Exactly. Because usually there's people always all around,
especially in like urban environments, walking around,
and there are
breathing in the air.
And all these products will say on them, the label on all these is always considered the law, and they will have a protection PPE on them, and they also will have a reentry interval, meaning the time that people can enter that area after it's sprayed. A lot of what we use doesn't necessarily have a reentry interval because it's safer stuff than you might be using in like the agricultural world, or where maybe the economic threshold is much higher. But it's very difficult to prevent bystanders. And I've thought about like, okay, HVAC systems and just stuff like that, and like, could this go in throughout the building, and then like what defines like the zone of where it could be reentry? Is this the entire building or not? And I don't think there's that much clarity really. I think it's more common sense, but the more you don't leave out to question, the better. But this pesticide top of the pyramid is really interesting to me because, okay, that's one aspect of it. But then when you look at the environmental, you can actually like the environmental like hazard to like your not like the person, but the bystander, but the environment. You can look at can be broken down into three really, yeah, I guess three or two different ways. I have to break it down into two. One is called biorational, and then the other one is just called chemical. So the very, very top is the easiest to understand. Those are just synthetic insecticides or miticides. Those are things that are just in general, they are toxic. So they're toxic to the user, they're toxic to the environment. Things like a Telstar can be very effective, but they will kill the bee. They will kill, could even, be hazardous to the mammal or, other insects or invertebrates, mammals that are around. So they're just in general toxic. So those ones are easy to understand. Those are the last thing that you want to use. And that's when like you really need to save something, either like for economic reasons or other. But you generally don't need to ever use that inside. And the biorational category is things like, okay, microbials. So this is generally where those fungal sprays and bacterial sprays for either like a bug or like stuff like a product like root shield or like a fungal that you put in the soil to prevent like a root rot or something. Those come in because they are registered EPA products. They fall into this. This is also where we
fall into that category, but they're not as detrimental.
They're biologicals, but there are risks associated with kind of anything. But I put them into the biorational category because they're registered. So, like my biological category, it's really murky there which one they fall in. They kind of fall into both. That's why this is more of like a general framework, common sense. So. Your 25B insecticides, what I mean by that is there's a law from the EPA of things called minimum risk pesticides. You can look it up. These are products that are not registered with the EPA. It really depends on what your state is. For instance, in New York, these are all still considered pesticides, but in New Jersey, they don't need to be considered as something you need to report on.
Interesting.
And they're not registered. And so these would be things where the primary...
state by state, and in this unique case, you could drive like half a mile.
You got to bring your plant to half a mile.
And the other one's not. Interesting.
So these are things where your primary products are like, clove oil or peppermint oil, or garlic oil, stuff like that. Cornmeal. I'm looking at rosemary. So, these are products that the FDA says, or not the FDA, the EPA says are, these are safe. We don't really worry about this. So states can have stricter laws than the federal government, but they can have less strict laws than the federal government. So there, things like soaps, like safer soaps, horticultural oils fall into this because they're, insect growth regulators and novel pesticides also fall into this. So why some products like N-Star is like a very well-known, it's been around a while, it's an insect growth regulator. Why this falls into this biorational is because it's so specific to the molting process of very specific insects. Therefore, it has no effect on other types of life. So novel pesticides are this too. This is a new sort of category. These are pesticides that are created, again, to be so specific to either the genetics of a specific type of insect that the risk to all other, so it's not just a generally toxic product. It's a very specific product. So those all fit into like your biorational. There's even a product out there. It's called Mainspring GNL, and it has no warning label on the label. Like it has no caution, warning, danger, or anything because they're considering it for your human, for your bystander, for your environment to be that safe. I'd have to check it for outdoor and things like bees and whatnot, but in terms of like its actual warning label. So that's sort of like how to think about IPM in a general sense. So when a document we have to train our interior team, our indoor horticulturalists, is really expressing how important the cultural aspects are, and that if you keep
the base level,
if you can keep things really clean, and you're monitoring, but just keeping things clean is so critical that you can prevent most outbreaks.
Interesting. So yeah, let's stop there, because you just walked us through like the pyramid, the hierarchy of integrated pest management. You got technical, but in reality, very general. Like that's a quick overview. Even though like for somebody listening and trying to get their arms around this for the first time, it's like, whoa, that sounds pretty intense. But that's just an overview. So what would you what would you recommend to like a horticulturalist to start getting their arms around? Like what would be some next steps if they wanted to really grapple with the complexities and approaching IPM from a thoughtful manner?
Yeah, I mean, you're looking at those cultural sections. So prevention, what is the quote? An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. That's what it is. And I think it's attributed to Benjamin Franklin, but I don't know.
I could apply to a lot of things.
I don't know
our general human health and like our healthcare system and our plant healthcare system.
Exactly. So these are really just practical steps. So this is just doing your job, but doing it with pride and doing it carefully. So I like to say that 99% of the time you can prevent an infestation without pesticides. I'm sure people will argue with me about that. And I also understand that sometimes it's not practical to go. And I'm not saying go to every single leaf and wash it off with a sponge and make sure everything's sparkling. I mean, that would be great, but I understand that the reality. But I have a list of 6 points here, and I actually was inspired a bit by one of the Kathy Fadu books, Green Plant Care for Techs or something like that. But she has a list similar to this in there, and so I thought it was helpful, and we've sort of amended it a little bit. But 6 points when you go visit your plants, right? Inspect your plants every visit. We already talked about this, so you kind of know what's going on and catching a problem before it becomes an infestation.
A big problem, yeah.
Right. So right plant, right location, which we talked about too. The Croton example, or the, where is the likelihood of a problem? Thoughtful care, reduce stress and outbreaks. So focus on practices that reduce insect occurrences. So this is stress. Overwatering will increase, but also like overwatering will increase fungus gnats. They like it wet. But a healthy plant is less susceptible to an infestation. Now, again, I'm stressing infestation. I'm not saying it can't have bugs, but an infestation. Sanitation, keeping your plants, their environment, and your tools super clean. Mm-hmm. Sanitize your tools between, pruning, keeping the debris out of the soil. Stuff like that. Like when you're refreshing a plant, make sure that you replace all the parts of it if it just had a giant mealybug infestation, because they're probably hiding there. A fun fact there, and I don't know where I got this one from, but it might have been Kathy's book. But some mealybugs have been shown to survive more than 2 weeks, with eggs continuing to hatch for 45 days. So what does that mean? A pregnant mealybug on the carpet underneath the container that you just removed will be hatching eggs for 45 days. So, did you really solve the problem? But anyway, use beneficial insects or nematodes as preventative when appropriate. So this is, when it's appropriate. So this is not always appropriate. I won't go too deeply into that one. But there's certain situations where you're definitely going to want to think about it. Let's just say you get a new atrium. It might be really great to use some sort of generalist predator in there to prevent, a major outbreak from actually starting. Or like you get a giant green wall that's like 70 feet high, start off with a good preventative program. Sure. And then prune off any infested parts, isolate the plant, or physically remove. So we talked about that. But here you have my little formula: the cost of treatment plus the time involved to treat versus the cost to replace. Mm-hmm. So I know when I was a horticulturist doing daily plant service, I would go and like spray the same marginata for mealybug with like my horticultural soap or whatever, and it would just come back every week, and I just keep spraying it. And you can't keep up with it on a weekly basis or even 2 weeks necessarily. Not only was that incorrect because I was using a kill on contact spray, so what I was doing wasn't sticking around fighting for me after, but still, it would have just been better to replace that plant. And then when you have an infestation, or you have a bug outbreak, then it's really, good to start. Then you move up the pyramid. You go foundations first, see what you can do. So that is what I tell people. And that is the document and the thing we have out. The last thing I want to really mention is why it's important for this program to be really thoughtful, and why we have an internal document that lays out like, okay, scale. Well, here's what you do as cultural. Here's mechanical. Here's biological. Here's a drench, and here's a spray, and here's biorational. Here's this and that, because it has to be led from somewhere, and your practice has to be consistent. You need to put in a lot of time to get this right if you're going to do it right. So it's easy to say that, like, okay, just like your environmental risk is the one thing that you want to, like, you don't want to hurt, like, the, bumblebees or something to that end, which of course we don't. But if you want to start to look at all the considerations in choosing a correct pesticide, it can get kind of extreme. You can do things like you mentioned, Mark, effectiveness versus or cost in general, but also effectiveness versus cost. Is this something that's going to stick around and fight for you, or is it just kill on contact? Does it have phytotoxicity at all? Have you read all the labels? Because there's notes in ours that'll be like, well, you can use this on everything, but a ficus tree. So like you need to have those laid out. Your compatibility with beneficial insects. And other biologicals. So there's actually a lot of newer pesticides, particularly miticides and other ones that you can use with a predatory mite. You can use the pesticide as well. Your reentry intervals have to be looked at. So you might have the best product in the world that's really safe, but you have to clear the area for 2 days. So where does that leave you? It could be possible, but it's a conversation. Resistance management. So we overuse certain pesticides, particularly, I think it's I get this all, the neonics. I don't know if it's class 3 or 4. I get it wrong, but there's certain products, Safari, Merit, I think is in there, or imidacloprid, dinotefuran. So those things are great as drenches, and we use them, but also growers in Florida use them a lot. They're very, more traditional pesticides, and I think insects are getting resistant, particularly in the spider mite world, where insects they breed so quickly, they become resistant very fast. And then your risk of user and the bystander. And this one I just quickly point out gets kind of a deep dive, because pesticide companies, they're selling pesticides and they have money to do so, and they're there's a lot on the line. So interestingly in this category, so the EPA monitors the label and the caution, warning, danger, the signal word on the label. OSHA a different department creates the SDS, your safety data sheet. So there's one product that I ran into that I really like, but the label says caution. I'm like, okay, this is all right. Let me read into it more. But when you look at the OSHA document, the SDS, it actually says danger on it. And then so when you really dig into it, it's like, so you're getting these kind of conflicting messages too. And then you go to the website and it shows like dogs and bees and all this stuff. And it's like super safe. So gotta be really careful there. And then finally, just as a global kind of view, there's 8 things called HHPs, which is a highly hazardous pesticides. And there's things that are globally issues. You can kind of look at international conventions. There's a bunch of universities that talk about general pesticide use in like globally and where it stays, where it gets in our food system, what's kind of products that are overused and abused and are causing more harm. And so you can make an effort to stay away from them as well. So really, if you're going to analyze, what is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different considerations, and you're cross evaluating them, like it's enough to make your like head explode. You're like, oh my God, like how many, you but once you get it all written down, I mean, it's certainly helpful. You can also talk to your growers too about like what they're using and whatnot. But that's really all I want to say about IPM.
Got it. No, I think it's an awesome conversation.
Yeah.
I think like to round it out, if I'm missing like any of the key like takeaways is, we got to deal with the complexities of integrated pest management. You have to do your research. Don't oversimplify or misuse the word, meaning like some basic examples don't like IPM doesn't mean just beneficial insect use. IPM doesn't mean benefit of the environment, right? Only, or like environmental sustainability, right? IPM is complex. It's a balance and a hierarchical approach that balances health, human safety, environmental sustainability, as well as cost and economics, as well as practice and like the environment and the context. And I think that's the last takeaway I can take away from this is, as technical as you got at some points, it sounds like this is still, we're talking in generalities.
Yes,
don't take what we're saying in any moment here as gospel. It all depends on the situation and the context, and that's why you need to deal with the complexities. Like, well, what is this landscape? What is the cost of this landscape? How many people are impacted by it? What are the options here from controls or cultural practices because of all those other factors? Yeah. Whatever, I'm just riffing, but all those variables, and those are just a few, have to be considered in every specific situation in order to have a thoughtful approach to integrated pest management.
Agreed. And viewing it as a program really changed my
true versus a thing.
Yeah, versus a thing. And if it's a thing, you might say
IPM's not a thing. It's a holistic program.
Right. But like if you view it as a thing and you're like, or even if you view it as a pesticide, just a treatment, so often we have a problem, it gets out of control, we treat it with something, and then we kind of step away because it gets a little bit better. Then it comes back again. So viewing it as this ongoing program of certain steps and monitoring allows you to really have a thought out program. So a series of steps that you might take. Also, in order for it to be effective, it always has to, be continually reviewed. There's different within the IPM program. There's different tenets like education, communication. It's your own training, communicating to your people, ongoing review, continuous improvement, documentation, evaluation. We talked about record keeping, evaluation, adjustment, understanding your control measures, and then just like continual assessment and like monitoring. So we have like a 5-point like review of things that just keep continuing to happen in order for this to be effective. So
awesome.
Yeah, it's got to be thoughtful and robust.
Yeah, awesome. That's all I got, Andrew.
That's all I got.
Yeah. I know. Even from this brief conversation, I learned a lot. I hope our listeners can take away some practice, or at least at a minimum, like spark them to do a little bit more research and look for and reach out and do more research on the complexities of IPM. All right, Andrew. Appreciate your time today, man.
Mark. Thank you, man. Talk to you soon.
Thank you, Andrew, for sharing your knowledge with us today. Thank you to all our listeners listening herein on the John Minnie Podcast. The John Minnie Podcast is the official podcast of the John Minnie Distinctive Landscapes team. This is a team of passionate individuals who are driven to make places beautiful by bringing nature to the places people live, work, and play. If you're exploring an investment in or need support on an existing urban landscape, we are the multidisciplinary team to talk to. We're ready to tackle any urban horticulture challenge indoors and out. We can serve your vision with our landscape design services, our project management team for landscape construction and custom wood and metal fabrication. We're also ready and equipped to provide design and horticulture consultations internationally, so do not hesitate to reach out wherever you are. If you'd like to learn more, please visit our website at johnmini.com or email us directly at info@johnmini.com to share a bit about your project. All right, I'd be remiss to not always thank all our clients out there. Without your vision to bring nature to the places people live, work, and play, none of this would be possible. So thank you. All right, this episode is a wrap. I hope you guys have a great day, and always find a moment to cherish the nature around you.